Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
Way back Wednesday. Don't forget to wish the bearded historian a happy birthday. His birthday is tomorrow. This video is Joe rambling about another birthday, the birthday for the Air Force creation. But before we do that, we've got an airplane race. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friend. Let's see who it is today. Alright, here we go. Here we go. Alright, there go the airplanes. Let's see, I see Buddha. I see Freckled. I see Blistering. I see Buddy. I see She Stole. There's Heather. There's SD Mountain Man, who's new to our group, visiting. Myers, Praying. Mona, Just Doing. Bluegrass. Sheena, Real Haunted. Misha, Mas, Seek, Cruising is Fun, Naomi, Praying, Spectral. Naomi's currently in the lead. Oh, looks like Mas is taking over. Oh, Mas has got it. Okay, hang on a minute. Okay, that says, my life is unscripted, the appeal is real. And it's kind of a random channel. We've got meditation, sneak peek, barbershop, magician. I'll try. Check them out. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. All right, take two.
All right. Well, from our folks that like to take and give us all these lovely hints and ideas and subjects that we can take and talk about, let's go back to a slightly older date in 1907. Originally the U.S. Air Force. Now, 1907, we really didn't have an Air Force. We were part of the Army Signal Corps, United States Forces. Finally got a chance to break away in 1947 with the enactment of the National Security Branch. It is the second youngest branch of the United States Armed Forces and fourth in order of precedence. United States Air Force articulates its core missions of air supremacy, global integrated intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, rapid global mobility, global strike, and command and control. Now, the original group got their headway back in 1907 on August the 1st, 116 years ago in 1 month. Was the founding of the Air Force came in on the 18th of September, so we actually got the date right,
Yay.
in 1947, 76 years ago. The independent service came about. Now, the size of the military, on most recent official data, pegs it at about 320,000 active duty personnel, 104 plus thousand Air National Guard personnel, a little over 66,000 Air Force Reserve personnel, 491,000 plus total uniform personnel, official data, and 152 plus thousand civilians. There's over 5,309 aircraft and 406 ICBMs out there.
Woo.
Now, the Air Force is part of the U.S. Armed Forces and the Department of the Air Force. The headquarters is located at the Pentagon in Arlington County, Virginia. Now, when you go down through the high brass, the brass hats, you have your Commander-in-Chief, President Joe Biden. Secretary of Defense is Lloyd Austin. Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall III. Chief of Staff, General Charles Q. Brown, Jr. Vice Chief of Staff, General David W. Alvin, and the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force is CMSAF Joanne S. Bass. Now, for this bunch, you look at the aircraft that has been flown and you go through the numbers. Some of these obviously have been retired. Others, are still out there defending our skies. Or, we even fly them over to other countries that really want to, find out exactly how good we are. Your attack planes, you've got the A-10, the AC-130, the MQ-9 bombers. We've got the B-1B out here at Ellsworth, the B-2s, the B-52Hs. Electronic warfare through the E-3, E-4, E-8, E-9A, the E-11A, EC-130H, the EC-130J, and the EQ-4B. Fighters like the F-15C and D editions, the F-15E, the F-15EX, F-16C and D, the F-22, and the F-35A, which you can chuckle about now because we're probably going to hear jokes about it for the next couple days. We're actually parachuted out of one over by Charleston. They found the pilot. The plane has nowhere been seen. It's a stealth plane.
Oh, no. They lost the plane.
They lost the plane. Helicopters, we have the CV-22, the AH-60, the MH-139, and the UH-1N. Reconnaissance outfits, we get the MC-12, the RC-135S, versions, the U, the V, the W, RQ-4, RQ-11, RQ-170, RQ-180, the RQ-20 Puma, the U-2, the U-28, the WC-130, and the WC-135. A batch of trainers. You got the A-29, the T-1, the T-6, the T-38, the T-41, the T-51, the T-53, the TG-16, and the TH-1. And then a batch of transports like the C-5, the C-12, the C-17, the CN-235, the C-20, C-21, C-32, C-37, the C-40, C-130, HC-130, LC-130, MC-130, C-146A, the VC-25, and tankers, the KC-10, KC-135, KC-46, HC-130, and the MC-130. If you notice a couple of those numbers do happen to match,
what?
It's because some of those aircraft are really resilient. They can be used by a lot of different personnel for a lot of different uses. Now, the United States Air Force is a military service branch within the United States Department of the Air Force, one of 3 military departments in the Department of Defense. Air Force, through the Department of the Air Force, is headed by the civilian Secretary of the Air Force, who reports to the Secretary of Defense and is appointed by the President with Senate confirmation. The highest-ranking military officer in the Air Force is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who exercises supervision over the Air Force units and serves as one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They get to sit around at a little table and decide who they want to blow up next.
Ooh.
Secretary of the Air Force, certain Air Force components are assigned to Unified Combatant Commands. Combatant commanders are delegated operational authority of the forces assigned to them, while the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force retain administrative authority over their members. Along with conducting independent air operations, the United States Air Force provides air support for land and naval forces and aids in the recovery of troops in the field. As of 2017, the service operates more than 5,000 plus military aircraft and 406 ICBMs. World's largest air force, it has a budget, $156.3 billion.
That should just change.
That's a minor issue, especially when you're a capitalist nation. Second largest branch of the U.S. Armed Forces with over 300,000 active duty airmen, 172,000 civilian personnel, 69,000 reserve airmen, and 107,000 Air National Guard airmen. Now, their missions, as stated in the National Security Act of 1947, in general, the United States Air Force shall include aviation forces, both combat and service, not otherwise assigned. It shall be organized, trained, and equipped primarily for prompt and sustained offensive and defensive air operations. The Air Force shall be responsible for the preparation of the air forces as necessary for effective prosecution of war, except as otherwise assigned, and in accordance with integrated joint mobilization plans for the expansion of peacetime components of the Air Force to meet the needs of war. Now, under Section 9062 of the Title 10 U.S. Code defines the purpose of the USAF as to preserve the peace and security and provide for the defense of the United States, the territories, commonwealths, and possessions, and any areas occupied by the United States, to support national policy, to implement national objectives, to overcome any nations responsible for aggressive acts that imperil the peace and security of the United States. Now, the 5 core missions of the Air Force have not changed dramatically since the Air Force became independent in 1947, but they have evolved and are now articulated as air superiority, global integrated ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, rapid global mobility, global strike, and command and control. The purpose of these core missions is to provide what the Air Force states as global vigilance, global reach, and global power. Now, air superiority, that degree of dominance in the air battle with one force over another, which permits the conduct of operations by the former and is related to land, sea, air, and special operations forces at a given time and place without prohibitive interference by the opposing force. Now, offensive counter-air is defined as an offensive operation to destroy, disrupt, or neutralize enemy aircraft, missiles, launch platforms, and their supporting structures and systems both before and after launch, but as close to their source as possible. The OCA is a preferred method of countering air and missile threats since it attempts to defeat the enemy closer to its source and typically enjoys the initiative. The OCA comprises attack operations, sweep, escort, and suppression destruction of enemy air defense. 9 times out of 10, if we need to solve a problem, we bring in an aircraft carrier and we make a few launches. Now, defensive counteracts is defined as all the defensive measures designed to detect, identify, intercept, and destroy or negate enemy forces attempting to penetrate or attack through friendly airspace. In concert with OCA operations, a major goal of the DCA operations is to provide an area from which forces can operate, secure from both air and missile threats. DCA mission comprises both active and passive defensive measures. Active defense is the employment of limited offensive action and counterattacks to deny a contested area or position to the enemy. It includes both ballistic missile defenses, airborne missile threats, and encompasses point defense, area defense, and high-value airborne asset defense. Passive defense is measures taken to reduce the probability of and to minimize the effects of damage caused by hostile action without the intention of taking the initiative. It includes detection and warning, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense, camouflage, concealment, and deception, hardening, reconstitution, dispersion, redundancy, and mobility countermeasures and stealth. Airspace control is a process used to increase operational effectiveness by promoting the safe, efficient, and flexible use of airspace. It promotes the safe, efficient, and flexible use of airspace, mitigates the risk of fratricide, enhances both offensive and defensive operations, and permits greater agility of air operations as a whole. It both deconflicts and facilitates the integration of joint air operations. Now, global integrated intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance is the synchronization and integration of planning and operation of sensors, assets, the processing, exploitation, dissemination systems and across the globe to conduct current and future operations. Planning and directing the determination of intelligence requirements, development of appropriate intelligent architecture, preparation of a collection plan, and the issuance of orders and requests to information collection agencies. These activities enable the synchronization and integration of collection, processing, exploitation, analysis, and dissemination activities and resources to meet information requirements of national and military decision makers. Collection is the acquisition of information and the provision of the information to processing elements. It provides the ability to obtain required information to satisfy intelligence needs. Collection activities span the range of military operations, and processing and exploitation of the conversion of collected information into forms suitable to the production of intelligence. It provides the ability to transform, extract, and make available collected information suitable for further analysis or action across the Roma. Analysis and production is the conversion of processed information into intelligence through the integration, evaluation, analysis, and interpretation of all source data, and the preparation of intelligence products in support of known or anticipated user requirements. It provides the ability to integrate, evaluate, and interpret information from available sources to create a finished intelligence product for presentation or dissemination to enable increased situational awareness. Now, the rapid global mobility is the timely deployment and employment, sustainment, augmentation, and redeployment of military forces and capabilities across the Roma. It provides joint military forces the capability to move from place to place while retaining the ability to fulfill the primary mission. Rapid global mobility is essential to virtually every military operation, allowing forces to reach foreign or domestic destinations quickly, thus seizing the initiative through speed and surprise. The airlift is operations to transport and deliver forces and material through the air in support of strategic, operational, or tactical objectives. The rapid and flexible options afforded by an airlift allow military forces and national leaders to the ability to respond and operate in a variety of situations and time frames. The global reach capability of airlift provides the ability to apply U.S. power worldwide by delivered forces to crisis locations. It serves as a U.S. presence that demonstrates resolve and compassion in humanitarian crisis. Air refueling, or the refueling of aircraft by flight by another aircraft. Air refueling extends presence, increases range, and serves as a force multiplier. It allows air assets to move rapidly to any spot around the world with less dependence on forward staging bases or overflight landing clearances. Air refueling significantly expands the operations available on a commander by increasing the range, payload, persistence, and flexibility of receiver aircraft. We've had cases where we've had to send out B-1 bombers, and as long as we have the ability to refuel them in the air, they can go pretty much anywhere in the world. It's just kind of a fun thing to think about. Almost like our missiles, anywhere worldwide within 30 minutes, or the next one's free. Aeromedical evacuation is the movement of patients under medical supervision to and between medical treatment facilities by air transportation. Health service support further defines it as a fixed-wing movement of regulated casualties to and between medical treatment facilities using organic and or contracted mobility airframes with aircrew trained explicitly for this mission. Aeromedical evacuation forces can operate far forward as fixed-wing aircraft are able to conduct airland operations. When we had the air show, I actually got to see inside one of these, and it's kind of a amazing function. An airframe, just like a regular transport, like a 130, has multiple beds set up inside it, so you can bring in your patients as needed, and then airlift a whole lot of them out of a given area to a place with more medical facilities, aka closer to Germany, closer to London, where the medical supplies are needed. Now, global strike is a global precision attack with the ability to hold at risk or strike repeatedly and persistently with a wide range of munitions and targets to create swift, decisive, and precise effects across multiple domains. Strategic attack is defined as an offensive action specifically selected to achieve national strategic objectives. These attacks seek to weaken the adversary's ability or will to engage in conflict and may achieve strategic objectives without necessarily having to achieve operational objectives at a precondition. Air interdiction is defined as air operations conducted to divert, disrupt, delay, or destroy the enemy military's potential before it can be brought to bear effectively against friendly forces or to otherwise achieve JFC objectives. Air interdiction is conducted at such distance from friendly forces that detailed integration of each air mission with the fire and movement of friendly forces is not required. Close air support is defined as air action by fixed and rotary winged aircraft against hostile targets that are in close proximity to friendly forces, and which require detailed integration of each air mission with the fire and movement of those forces. This can be a pre-planned event or demand from an alert posture. It can also be conducted across the Romo. Now, the purpose of nuclear deterrence operations is to operate, maintain, and secure nuclear forces to achieve the assured capability to deter an adversary from taking action against U.S. interests. In the event deterrence fails, the U.S. should be able to appropriately respond with nuclear options. The sub-elements of this function are the assure, dissuade, and deter is a mission set derived from the Air Force readiness to carry out the nuclear strike operations mission, as well as from specific actions taken to assure allies as a part of extended deterrence, dissuading others from acquiring or proliferating weapons of mass destruction and delivering them to contribute promoting security, and also as an integral part of this mission. Moreover, different deterrence strategies are required to deter various adversaries, whether they are a nation-state, non-nation, or transitional actor. The Air Force maintains the presence credible deterrent capabilities through successful visible demonstrations and exercises that assure allies, dissuades proliferation, and deters potential adversaries from actions that threaten United States national security or the population, and deploy military forces of the U.S., its allies, and friends. A nuclear strike is the ability of nuclear forces to rapidly and accurately strike targets which the enemy holds dear in a devastating manner. If a crisis occurs, rapid generation and, if necessary, deployment of nuclear strike capabilities would demonstrate the U.S. resolve and may prompt an adversary to alter the course of action deemed threatening to our national interest. Should deterrence fail, the President may authorize a precise, tailored response to terminate the conflict at the lowest possible level and lead to a rapid cessation of hostilities. Post-conflict, regeneration of a credible nuclear deterrent capability will deter further aggression. The Air Force may present a credible force posture in either the continental United States, within the theater of operations, or both to effectively deter the range of potential adversaries envisioned in the 21st century. This requires the ability to engage targets globally using a variety of methods. Therefore, the U.S. Air Force should possess the ability to induct, train, assign, educate, and exercise individuals and units to rapidly and effectively execute missions that support the U.S. NDO objectives. Finally, the Air Force regularly exercises and evaluates all aspects of the nuclear operations to ensure high-speed levels of performance. Now, nuclear surety ensures the safety, security, and effectiveness of nuclear operations because of their political and military importance, destructive power, and the potential consequences of an accident or unauthorized act. Nuclear weapons and nuclear weapon systems require special consideration and protection against the risks and threats inherent in their peacetime and wartime environments. In conjunction with other entities within the Department of Defense or Energy, the U.S. Air Force achieves a high standard of protection through a stringent nuclear surety program. The program applies to material, personnel, and procedures that contribute to the safety, security, and control of nuclear weapons, thus assuring no nuclear accidents, incidents, loss, or unauthorized or accidental use, aka broken arrow. The Air Force continues to pursue safe, secure, and effective nuclear weapons consistent with operational requirements. Adversaries, allies, and the American people must be highly confident in the U.S. Air Force ability to secure nuclear weapons from accidents, their loss, theft, accidental, or unauthorized use. This day-to-day commitment to the precise and reliable nuclear operations is the cornerstone of the credibility of the NDO mission. Positive nuclear command, control, communications, effective nuclear weapon security, and a robust combat support are essential to overall NDO functions. Now, we're a little bit more digging into the past. Talk about the United States history of the Air Force. Now, we talked about earlier in 1947, they basically were born because before that they were considered a part of the Army. The responsibilities for military aviation was divided between the Army for land-based operations and the Navy and Marine Corps for sea-based operations from aircraft carrier and amphibious craft. The Army first created the antecedent of the Air Force on the 1st of August 1907, which through a succession of changes in organization, titles, and missions, advanced forward to the eventual separation into their own individual section. They first were part of the Aeronautical Division Signal Corps up until about 1914. Then there was the Aviation Section Signal Corps, which lasted for about 4 years during World War I. Shortly after World War I ended, it became the Division of Military Aeronautics, and then the Air Service of the U.S. Army. And then the U.S. Air Force, basically U.S. Army Air Force, was adopted on June 20th, 1941. But for the World War I, in 1917, when the Americans entered World War I, the first major U.S. aviation combat force was created when the Air Service was formed as part of the American Expeditionary Force. Major General Mason Patrick commanded the Air Service of the AEF. His deputy was Brigadier General Billy Mitchell. These aviation units, some of whom were trained in France, provided tactical support for the U.S. Army, especially during the Battle of Saint-Mihiel in the Meuse-Aragon offenses. Among the aces of the AEF Air Service were Colonel Eddie Rickenbacker and Second Lieutenant Frank Luke. Concurrent with the creation of this combat force, the U.S. Army's aviation establishment of the United States was removed from the control of the Signal Corps and placed directly under the United States Secretary of War. An Assistant Secretary was created to direct the Army Air Service, which had dual responsibilities for development and procurement of aircraft and raising and training of air units. With the end of the First World War, the AEF's Air Service was dissolved and the Army Air Service of the United States largely demobilized. In 1920, the Air Service became a branch of the Army, and in 1926 was renamed the Army Air Corps. And during this period, the Air Corps began experimenting with new techniques, including air-to-air refueling and the development of the B-9 and the B-10 Martin bombers. These first all-metal monoplane bombers, new fighters. Americans were fascinated with aviation in the 1920s and 1930s. They refused, interestingly enough, Americans refused to allow War Department conservation to block innovation. General Billy Mitchell, the Deputy Director of the Air Service, sought to wrest control of the coastal defense away from the Navy. He went public insisting that planes could sink battleships any day, a claim proven with a series of tests, which culminated in the sinking of the SMS Ostfriesland. Mitchell lost his self-control in 1925 when he accused the Navy in a press release of incompetency, criminal negligence, and almost treasonable administration of national defense. He received the highly publicized court-martial he wanted and was allowed to expound his theory that air power alone would win the next big war. He was convicted and resigned. He became a popular hero when public opinion forced the War Department to strengthen the Air Corps. Mitchell's main argument was that air power had to be autonomous, had to be controlled by flyers who understood the new technology, new tactics, new strategies, and who would not waste precious air assets in trying to assist old-fashioned armies and navies. Until his death in 1936, Mitchell, as a civilian, was a tireless prophet of air power before numerous civilian audiences, but he lost touch with aviation developments and ceased to be influential inside the services. Indeed, his most hysterical attacks made against many generals were pretty hostile, to put it mildly. The Air Corps managed to few publicity stunts, but they always seemed to be overshadowed by glamorous civilians like Charles Lindbergh, Howard Hughes, or Amelia Earhart. In 1934, President Franklin Roosevelt, feuding with the airline industry, suddenly turned the delivery of airmail over to the Air Corps. Multiple crashes by inexperienced Air Corps pilots in mediocre planes with poor navigation gear emphasized the fragility of the new service and undercut its claims that in wartime it could perform miracles. Roosevelt, however, had been a firm believer in air power and was behind both public opinion in Congress with mobilization when it began to spring 1940. Roosevelt was energetic as anyone expanding the Air Corps role, called for 50,000 planes a year and sending the best new models to Britain for its war against the Luftwaffe. Now, in 1935, the resultant recommendations from 2 civilian review boards, the next advancement towards independence for the Air Force, occurred when all flying units, which heretofore were distributed to various ground commands, were grouped together as an aerial task force under one air commander as the General Headquarters Air Force. The Air Corps, now headed by the Chief of Air Corps, continued as before, but now held responsibility only for the supply, airfields, and training, in effect splitting the Air Force into 2 parts. Both were commanded by Major Generals Frank Andrews and Oscar Westover, followed by Henry H. Hap Arnold. In 1937, the B-17 Flying Fortress made its first appearance, and a feat of navigation impressive for the time, 3 B-17s intercepted the Italian passenger liner Rex at sea. Though intended to demonstrate the ability of the Air Corps to defend the nation's coast, the mission also indicated that emerging doctrine with the Air Corps' supremacy of strategic bombing. During World War I, aviation technology developed rapidly. However, the Army's reluctance to use the new technology began to make airmen think that it was, as long as the Army controlled aviation, development would be stunted and potentially valuable force neglected. As Air Service Senior Officer Billy Mitchell began to campaign for an independent Air Force, the co-equal to the Army and Navy, but his campaign offended many and resulted in the court-martial that effectively ended his career. His followers, including future aviation leaders Hap Arnold and Carl Spaatz, saw the lack of public, congressional, and military support that Mitchell received and decided America was not ready for an independent Air Force. Under the leadership Chief of Staff Mason Patrick and later Arnold, the Air Force Corps waited until the time was right to fight for independence rose again. Well, World War II happened to change a lot of that opinion. Now, the Air Force came of age in World War II. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt took the lead after the Munich Agreement, calling for a vastly enlarged Air Force based on long-range strategic bombing. President Roosevelt instituted a plan to construct 15,000 military aircraft per year, which grew to 50,000 per year after the Axis victory at the Battle of France. Organizationally, it became largely independent from the Army in 1941 when the Army Air Corps became a part of the new U.S. Army Air Forces, and the GHQ Air Force was redesignated the Subordinate Combat Command. In the major reorganization of the Army by War Department Circular 59, effective March 9, 1942, the newly created Army Air Forces gained an equal voice with the Army and Navy on the Joint Chiefs of Staff and complete autonomy from the Army Ground Forces and Services of Supply, serving as a separate in all but name. The organization also eliminated both Combat Command and Air Corps as organizations. They later renamed Combat Branch of the Army until 1947 in favor of a streamlined system of commands and numbered air forces for decentralized management of the burgeoning Army Air Forces. Now, the reorganization merged all aviation elements of the former Air Corps into the Army Air Forces. Although the Air Corps was still legally existed as an Army branch, the position and office of the Chief of the Air Corps was dissolved. Major General Carl Spaatz, again, took command of the 8th Air Force in London, and with Brigadier General Ira Eaker as second in command, he supervised the strategic bombing runs. And in late 1943, Spaatz was made commander of the new U.S. Strategic Air Forces, reporting directly to the combined Chiefs of Staff. Spaatz began daylight bombing operations, using the pre-war doctrine of flying bombers in close formations, relying on them for combined defensive firepower for protection from attacking enemy fighter aircraft rather than supporting fighter escorts. The doctrine proved flawed when deep penetration missions beyond the range of escort fighters was attempted, because German Luftwaffe fighter planes overwhelmed the U.S. formations, shooting down bombers in excess of acceptable loss rates, especially in combination with the vast number of flak anti-aircraft batteries defending Nazi Germany's major targets. American flyers took heavy casualties during the Operation Tidal Wave raids on oil refineries in Ploesti, Romania, and the ball bearing factories at Schweinfurt and Regensburg, Germany, and it was a loss rate that cruised and not material that brought about a pullback from these strategic offenses in the autumn of 1943. Now, the 8th Air Force had attempted to use both the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and the Lockheed P-38 Lightning as escorts, but while the Thunderbolt was a capable dogfighter, it lacked the range, even with the addition of drop tanks, and the Lightning proved mechanically unreliable in the frigid altitudes for which the missions had fought. Bomber protection was greatly improved after the introduction of, one of my personal favorites, the P-51 Mustang fighters of Europe. Now, they were built with an extended range and competitive with superior performance characteristics in comparison to all German piston engine fighters. The Mustang was immediately available solution to the crisis. In January of 1944, the 8th Air Force obtained priority equipment in groups so that ultimately 14 of its 15 groups fielded Mustangs. The P-51 escorts began operations in February of 1944 and increased their numbers rapidly so that the Luftwaffe suffered increasing fighter losses in aerial engagements, beginning with Big Week in early 1944. Allied fighters were also granted free rein in attacking German fighter airfields, both in pre-planned missions and while returning from base for their escort duties, and major Luftwaffe threats against Allied bombers was severely diminished by D-Day. Now, in the Pacific Theater, the AAF provided major tactical support under General George Kenny to Douglas MacArthur in the Southwest Pacific Theater. Kenny's pilots invented the skip bombing technique against Japanese ships. Kenny's forces claimed destruction of 11,900 Japanese planes and 1.7 million tons of shipping. That's a lot of stuff going to the bottom.
Right?
The first development of sustained implementation of airlift by American air forces occurred between May 1942 and November of 1945 as hundreds of transports flew more than 500,000 tons of supplies from India to China over what's known as the Hump. This is a large area over there between India and our allies in China at the time, cutting through the area above Burma. Was exactly a very zigzaggy road, too, if I remember right. Now, the AAF created the 20th Air Force to employ long-range B-29 Superfortress bombers in strategic attacks on Japanese cities. The use of these forward bases as Free China, intended to reach Japan by the heavily laden B-29s, was ineffective because the difficulty in logistically supporting the bases entirely from air from its main bases in British India, and because of a persistent threat against the Chinese airfields by Imperial Japanese Army. After the Mariana Islands were captured in the Mariana and Palau Islands campaigns in mid-1944, providing locations for air bases could be supplied by sea. Arnold moved all B-29 operations there by April 1945 and made General Curtis LeMay his bomber commander, reporting directly to Arnold, who previously commanded the 20th Air Force until July. LeMay reasoned that the Imperial Japanese economy, much of was a cottage industry in dense urban areas with manufacturing and assembly plants were also located, was particularly vulnerable to area attack and abandoned inefficient high-altitude precision bombing in favor of low-level incendiary bombing aiming at destroying large urban areas. On the night of March 9th and 10th, 1945, the bombing of Tokyo resulted in a conflagration with the death of over 100,000 persons. 350,000 people died in 66 other Japanese cities as a result of the shift to incendiary bombing. At the same time, the B-29 was also employed in the widespread mining of Japanese harbors and sea lanes. In early August 1945, the 20th Air Force conducted the atomic bomb raids on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in response to Japan's rejection of the Potsdam Declaration. Both those cities, of course, were enormous loss due to the atomic bombs and the psychological shock. And on the 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced the surrender of Japan, stating, "Moreover, the enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the bomb of which to do damage was indeed incalculable, taking the toll of many innocent lives. Should we continue to fight, it would not only result in the ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation, but also it would lead to total extinction of human civilization. Such being the case, how are we to save the millions of our subjects or to atone ourselves before the hallowed spirits of our imperial ancestors? This is the reason we have ordered the acceptance of the provisions of the Joint Declaration of the Powers. But as we know, once World War II came to its close, the Air Force was able to be given its own independent branch of the military. And right after World War II and the Air Force got its own happy little chapter, the Cold War started up. And less than a couple of years after, we actually wound up going to war in a happy little place called Korea.
Woo!
Korea was an interesting established battle in an effort to try to keep communism at bay. Take and get some of the names here that everybody else remembers, because President Truman, he was the guy that basically eventually gave the order for war to go down, basically to drop the bomb and end World War II. Now, he signed that National Security Act, which established the new defense organization, and the Army Air Force became the United States Air Force. The fledgling Air Force quickly established its own identity. Army airfields were renamed Air Force bases, and personnel were soon being issued new uniforms with new ranks and insignias. Once the new Air Force was free of Army domination, the first job was to discard the old and inadequate ground Army organization structure. This was the base plan, where the combat group commander reported to the base commander, which was often the regular Army with no flying experience. Do you really want to trust this guy who has no flying experience to run the base? This just seems like a bad idea.
No, it seems like a good idea.
Yeah. General Carlsbad established a new policy. No tactical commander would be subordinate to the station commander. They resulted in a search for better arrangements. The commander of the 15th Air Force, Major General Charles Bourne, proposed a provisional wing plan, which basically reversed the situation and put the wing commander over the base commander. The USAF Basic Organizational Unit became the base wing. Under the plan, the base support functions, supply, base operations, transportation, security, medical were all assigned to squadrons, usually commanded by a major or a lieutenant colonel. All of these squadrons were assigned to the combat support group, commanded by a base commander, usually a colonel. Combat fighter or bomber squadrons were assigned to a combat group, a retention of the USAAF group. All of these groups, both commands and command supports, were in turn assigned to the wing, commanded by a wing commander. This way, the wing commander commanded both the combat operational elements of the base as well as the non-operational elements. The wing commander was an experienced or air combat leader, usually a colonel or brigadier general. All of the hierarchical organizations carried the same numerical designation. In this manner, the 28th became the designation for the wing and all the subordinate groups and squadrons beneath it. As a result, the base and wing became one and the same unit. On the 16th of June, 1952, the legacy combat groups were inactivated and the operational combat squadrons were assigned directly to the wing. The World War II history, lineage, and honors of combat groups were bestowed on the wing upon its inactivation. Now, after World War II, like we were mentioning, relations with the U.S. and Soviet Union began to deteriorate, and this period of history, known as the Cold War, began. The United States entered the arms race with the Soviet Union in competition aimed at increasing each national influence throughout the world. In response, the U.S. expanded its military presence throughout the world. USAF opened air bases throughout Europe and later in Japan and South Korea. The U.S. Also built air bases on British overseas possessions like the British Indian Ocean Territory and Ascension Island in the South Atlantic. Now, again, that first test for the USAF, actually, I missed it by one step, was the cutoff for West Berlin.
Oh.
When the Soviets decided to say, well, you guys can keep your town, but we're not going to let any supplies in or out. We're going to surround West Berlin. Now, the USAF, along with the Royal Air Force and the Commonwealth Air Forces, supplied the city and the Berlin airlift under what was known as Operation Vittles. This relied on, if you look back at our videos, class, we had a bunch of C-54 Skymasters, and these were a beautiful transportation aircraft. The efforts of these air forces saved the city from starvation and forced the Soviets to back down on their blockade. It still was a great thing to read when the one guy tried to report how much airlifting planes were coming in, and the Soviet people said, "No, you've got to be lying." He says, "No, this is actually how many airplanes they bring in every day." "No, you're still lying." I don't know if the guy ever wound up in Siberia for that or not, but we could come up with some pretty good magic when we had to. Now, conflict over post-war military administration, especially with regards to roles and missions to be assigned to Air Force and the U.S. Navy, led to an episode which was known as Revolt of the Admirals in the late 1940s.
Oh, no.
In which high-ranking Navy officers argued unsuccessfully for the case for carrier-based aircraft rather than strategic bombers. In 1947, the USAF began Project Sign, a study of identified flying objects, which would be twice revived, Project Grudge, and finally Project Blue Book, which would last until about 1969. For Angel, in 1948, Women's Armed Services Integration Act was given permanent status in the regular reserve forces of the Air Force, and the 8th of July, 1948, Esther McGowan Blake became the first woman in the Air Force, enlisting the first minute of her first hour of the first day. Regular Air Force duty was authorized for women.
Cool.
During the Korean War, which began in June of 1950, the Far East Air Forces were among the first units to respond to the invasion by North Korea. Sadly lost its main air base at Kimpo, designated to provide close air support to defenders in the Pusan pocket from bases in Japan. The FEAF also conducted a strategic bombing campaign against North Korea. Simultaneously, General Douglas MacArthur's landing at Incheon in September 1950 enabled the FEAF to return to Korea and develop bases for which they supported MacArthur's UN offensive into North Korea. Now, when the Chinese People's Volunteer Army attacked in 1950, the USAF provided tactical air support. The introduction of Soviet-made MiGs, the MiG-15 jet fighters, caused problems for the B-29 used to bomb North Korea. But the Soviet Union ran into their own surprise. The USAF countered the MiGs with the new F-86 Sabre fighter jets. Though both air superiority and close air support missions were successful, a lengthy attempt to interdict communist supply lines by air attack was not as successful and was replaced by a systematic campaign to inflict as much economic cost to North Korea and Chinese forces as long as the war persisted, including attacks on the capital city of Pyongyang and against the North Korean hydroelectric system. But it basically gives kind of a good rolling view of how our military forces originally started out with. They worked alongside the Army for a number of years, but when it finally came to the point that they were able to be looked at as equals, we had aircraft that when we would work with aircraft carriers, we could sink ships. When it came time to take and do bombing missions, we could do strategic bombing runs in Europe against Japan, and it became an integral part of our military forces. And to this day, there's still air bases around the world that should, a threat come up, we're glad those guys are still out there. And, some people may say, oh, we're going to all wind up dead from it. Well, we could die from other things too.
Right.
It's a good thing that we've got somebody who's willing to show them that, we're not willing to go quietly. So, but this has been Joe, the sick bearded historian. You folks have a good week, and hope I'll see you next week when I'm feeling better, and I'm old. So, have a good night, folks.
Don't forget to wish the bearded historian happy birthday because it will be Thursday. He'll be 50.
I'm old.
Half 100.
Oh no.
Half a century.
Half a century. I know, that's a scary thought. I'm like, wow, 50. But you folks have a good night out there.
Night.